Some nights arrive with a quiet weight upon the heart, a heaviness that does not shout, but settles slowly like evening fog over a tired valley. There are days when joy felt close in the morning, then slipped through trembling fingers by dusk, leaving only questions, and a silence that seems to echo with why. There are moments when faith feels thin and fragile, like something that could be torn by one more harsh word, one more disappointment, one more unanswered prayer. And yet, somewhere beneath the ashes of a long day, somewhere in the soft rhythm of breath in the dark, there is a tiny glow that refuses to go out, a small enduring flame that still longs to trust. Take a slow deep breath, gently through the nose. Let the shoulders soften, letting go of the weight they carried today. Let the jaw loosen, the muscles around the eyes release. The hands rest a little heavier where they are. Allow the mind to notice the rise and fall of the chest, like a quiet tide upon a shore. Let the noise of the day move further away now, like a city fading in the distance as night deepens around a quiet hill. If these stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more nightly reflections, and share where you're listening from tonight. Your words and presence help keep this space warm and growing. Now, take another slow breath. Let's begin. Somewhere in the soft edges of imagination, evening settles over a scattered community, a people who have known more sorrow than seems fair, more loss than seems bearable. Their homes rest along dusty roads, stones warmed by the memory of the day, now cooling under a sky slowly filling with stars. A faint breeze moves through narrow streets, carrying the smell of earth, of distant sea, of oil lamps being lit one by one behind wooden doors. Inside a small room, lamplight spills over rough walls and woven mats, turning shadows into gentle shapes, turning weary faces into softened outlines. They are gathered together, those early followers, men and women whose hearts have been bruised by rumor, by rejection, by the steady pressure of a world that does not understand their hope. Some sit with arms wrapped loosely around their knees, some with hands folded over hearts that still ache, some with eyes fixed on the flame of a single lamp, watching it sway as the air moves through the open doorway. There has been grief. There has been loss. There has been the quiet breaking of things that once felt secure. Yet they have come together tonight, not because the pain has vanished, but because something in them still believes that light is stronger than darkness. That promise is stronger than fear. In the doorway stands a messenger, dust on the hem of a worn cloak, hands carrying a rolled letter that traveled far across land and memory. The room grows still as the letter is opened, the crackle of the parchment a small sound in the hush, like dry leaves stirring at the edge of a forest at dusk. Words are spoken aloud into the lamplit air, words that move gently from mouth to ear to heart. For a little while, if it must be so, there is grief in many trials. Yet in all of this there is a joy that still lives. A joy that cannot be taken. Because faith is being tested, shaped, refined, like gold passing through fire. Gold glows in the heat, impurities rising and falling away. And when the flame has done its work, what remains is more pure, more precious, more radiant in the light. In the same way, the letter whispers, the faith of these hearts, tried and pressed by sorrow, will one day shine with honor and glory when the beloved one is fully revealed. In one corner of the room, a woman sits very still, fingers tracing the edge of her garment, eyes shining with unshed tears. She has buried dreams in recent days, watched doors close that once stood open, felt the cold of being misunderstood by those she thought would stand near forever. Her faith has not vanished, but it has trembled. It has questioned. It has wondered if perhaps it was too fragile for this world. And now, as the words about tested faith and precious gold drift toward her like a soft wind, something deep within her begins to stir. In this story, and in this night, every heart that listens is held in the same gentle truth. No tear is unseen, no quiet ache ignored, no hidden fear dismissed as small. In the gaze of the one who walks within the fire with his beloved, every trial becomes a place where presence is revealed, where love proves that it will not leave, where faith, even trembling faith, is treated as treasure more precious than the finest gold on earth. In the stillness of this moment, a tender assurance begins to unfold like dawn over distant hills. You are seen in the places that feel most fragile. You are loved in the chapters that feel unfinished and raw. You are held when the path is unclear, when the next step feels uncertain, when the weight of today has made the heart feel tired and thin. The one who calls faith precious does not despise weakness, does not turn away from trembling hands, does not scold tear-filled eyes. Take another unhurried breath, deep and soft, letting it flow in, then drift out like a slow tide leaving a quiet shore. Notice how the body sinks a little more into the surface beneath it, how the muscles of the back release their grip, how the legs feel heavier and more supported. There is nothing to prove in this moment, no test to pass by effort, no requirement to be strong enough to earn rest. Rest is a gift being offered like a warm cloak in the cool of night, laid gently over tired shoulders by hands that know exactly how much has been carried today. In the small lamplit room of the story, the words of the letter linger in the air, more precious than gold. Tested faith, honor and praise when all is finally revealed. The woman in the corner closes her eyes for a moment, and though her circumstances have not changed, Something within her begins to loosen, to yield, to whisper a quiet yes inside the fire. Outside, the sky deepens into velvet. Stars like grains of light scattered by a patient hand. Each one a reminder that darkness is never complete, that there is always a glimmer somewhere above the valley of the night. Let the heart rest in that image now. A small gathered room, a single steady lamp, a letter of hope read aloud into weary air. And far above, a sky full of quiet stars watching over every trial and every tear. Some nights arrive with a quiet weight upon the heart, a heaviness that does not shout, but settles slowly like evening fog over a tired valley. There are days when joy felt close in the morning, then slipped through trembling fingers by dusk, leaving only questions, and a silence that seems to echo with why. There are moments when faith feels thin and fragile, like something that could be torn by one more harsh word, one more disappointment, one more unanswered prayer. And yet, somewhere beneath the ashes of a long day, somewhere in the soft rhythm of breath in the dark, there is a tiny glow that refuses to go out, a small enduring flame that still longs to trust. Take a slow deep breath, gently through the nose. Let the shoulders soften, letting go of the weight they carried today. Let the jaw loosen, the muscles around the eyes release, the hands rest a little heavier where they are. Allow the mind to notice the rise and fall of the chest, like a quiet tide upon a shore. Let the noise of the day move further away now, like a city fading in the distance as night deepens around a quiet hill. If these stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more nightly reflections, and share where you're listening from tonight. Your words and presence help keep this space warm and growing. Now, take another slow breath. Let's begin. Somewhere in the soft edges of imagination, evening settles over a scattered community, a people who have known more sorrow than seems fair, more loss than seems bearable. Their homes rest along dusty roads, stones warmed by the memory of the day, now cooling under a sky slowly filling with stars. A faint breeze moves through narrow streets, carrying the smell of earth, of distant sea, of oil lamps being lit one by one behind wooden doors. Inside a small room, lamplight spills over rough walls and woven mats, turning shadows into gentle shapes, turning weary faces into softened outlines. They are gathered together, those early followers, men and women whose hearts have been bruised by rumor, by rejection, by the steady pressure of a world that does not understand their hope. Some sit with arms wrapped loosely around their knees, some with hands folded over hearts that still ache, some with eyes fixed on the flame of a single lamp, watching it sway as the air moves through the open doorway. There has been grief. There has been loss. There has been the quiet breaking of things that once felt secure. Yet they have come together tonight. Not because the pain has vanished, but because something in them still believes that light is stronger than darkness. That promise is stronger than fear. In the doorway stands a messenger, dust on the hem of a worn cloak, hands carrying a rolled letter that traveled far across land and memory. The room grows still as the letter is opened. The crackle of the parchment a small sound in the hush, like dry leaves stirring at the edge of a forest at dusk. Words are spoken aloud into the lamplit air, words that move gently from mouth to ear to heart. For a little while, if it must be so, there is grief in many trials. Yet in all of this there is a joy that still lives, a joy that cannot be taken, because faith is being tested, shaped, refined, like gold passing through fire. Gold glows in the heat, impurities rising and falling away, and when the flame has done its work, what remains is more pure, more precious, more radiant in the light. In the same way, the letter whispers, the faith of these hearts, tried and pressed by sorrow, will one day shine with honor and glory when the beloved one is fully revealed. In one corner of the room, a woman sits very still, fingers tracing the edge of her garment, eyes shining with unshed tears. She has buried dreams in recent days, watched doors close that once stood open, felt the cold of being misunderstood by those she thought would stand near forever. Her faith has not vanished, but it has trembled. It has questioned. It has wondered if perhaps it was too fragile for this world. And now, as the words about tested faith and precious gold drift toward her like a soft wind, something deep within her begins to stir. In this story, and in this night, every heart that listens is held in the same gentle truth. No tear is unseen, no quiet ache ignored, no hidden fear dismissed as small. In the gaze of the one who walks within the fire with his beloved, every trial becomes a place where presence is revealed, where love proves that it will not leave, where faith, even trembling faith, is treated as treasure more precious than the finest gold on earth. In the stillness of this moment, a tender assurance begins to unfold like dawn over distant hills. You are seen in the places that feel most fragile. You are loved in the chapters that feel unfinished and raw. You are held when the path is unclear, when the next step feels uncertain, when the weight of today has made the heart feel tired and thin. The one who calls faith precious does not despise weakness, does not turn away from trembling hands, does not scold tear-filled eyes. Take another unhurried breath, deep and soft, letting it flow in, then drift out like a slow tide leaving a quiet shore. Notice how the body sinks a little more into the surface beneath it, how the muscles of the back release their grip, how the legs feel heavier and more supported. There is nothing to prove in this moment. No test to pass by effort. No requirement to be strong enough to earn rest. Rest is a gift being offered like a warm cloak in the cool of night, laid gently over tired shoulders by hands that know exactly how much has been carried today. In the small lamplit room of the story, the words of the letter linger in the air, more precious than gold. Tested faith, honor and praise when all is finally revealed. The woman in the corner closes her eyes for a moment, and though her circumstances have not changed, something within her begins to loosen, to yield, to whisper a quiet yes inside the fire. Outside, the sky deepens into velvet, stars like grains of light scattered by a patient hand, each one a reminder that darkness is never complete, that there is always a glimmer somewhere above the valley of the night. Let the heart rest in that image now. A small gathered room, a single steady lamp, a letter of hope read aloud into weary air, and far above, a sky full of quiet stars watching over every trial and every tear. The lamplight in the small room burned with a quiet steadiness, its flame slender yet unwavering, a thin bright line of warmth standing against the wideness of the night outside. Around it, shadows leaned and softened on the walls, reaching long over woven mats, resting gently over tired faces that now carried something new. Not the absence of sorrow, but the presence of a fragile hope beginning to breathe again. The letter still lay open in careful hands, its edges slightly curled from travel and handling, the ink steady and dark against the pale parchment, each stroke holding the weight of distance crossed and prayers poured out along the way. Those gathered could almost feel the journey in the fibers of the page. Storms weathered on the road, long stretches of lonely path, silent nights beneath unfamiliar stars, all so that these words might arrive here, in this room, at this exact moment when faith felt stretched and tried. In the hush that followed the first reading, hearts began to move quietly within themselves, tracing memories of fires already endured. One man remembered a marketplace where accusations had risen like dust, thick and choking, turning familiar faces into strangers, turning a place of daily trade into a furnace of scrutiny and fear. Another recalled the sound of a door closing firmly behind a departing friend, a door that once opened onto warmth and shared meals, now shut with the brittle finality of rejection, leaving behind a chill that no blanket could fully drive away. A younger follower thought of fields left behind, work abandoned in response to a call that had felt bright and undeniable at first, and yet now seemed to lead through stretches of uncertainty where provisions felt thin and the future veiled. Each story was different. Each wound carried its own shape. Yet the letter had gathered them together into a single image. Gold in the furnace. Faith in the trial. Something precious passing through fire, not to be destroyed, but to be revealed. In the corner where the woman had sat earlier, Her gaze settled now on the lamplight itself, watching how the flame danced within its boundaries without spilling over, how it endured whatever small gusts moved through the doorway. It seemed so delicate, so easily extinguished, and yet it remained, drawing oil upward, turning it to light, holding the darkness at a gentle distance. Her heart felt similar, thin and tremulous from all it had faced, yet undeniably still alight. There had been moments when she believed the flame within might simply vanish under the pressure of grief and confusion. Yet here it was, not gone, not even as small as she feared, simply tested, simply marked by the wind it had endured. The messenger lifted his eyes, seeing the way the flame reflected in them all. Tiny pinpoints of brightness resting over pools of weariness and thought. He knew something of trials too. Knew the ache of being misunderstood, the long hours of travel, the quiet of nights when questions rose like smoke and did not easily clear. As he carefully read again the lines about rejoicing in the midst of many trials, about sorrow that lasted only for a little while when compared to the glory yet to be revealed, his own heart felt the words pass through it like a refining heat, searching, purifying, clarifying what mattered most. Beyond the village, in the broader sweep of the valley, a farmer walked slowly along the edge of his field, the night air cool against his skin, the soil beneath his sandals firm and familiar. He too had heard whispers of these letters, these words circulating among scattered communities, words that spoke of living hope, of inheritance beyond decay, of trials that were not meaningless afflictions but sacred spaces where faith was proved genuine. As he moved between rows that once held plentiful grain and now bore only the faint outlines of a recent harvest, he let his fingers graze the stubble, remembering seasons when storms had beaten hard against young shoots, when hail had bruised tender leaves, when drought had threatened to undo months of labor. Yet he had also seen how certain stalks survived, how roots sank deeper in search of hidden moisture, how plants that endured adversity often stood stronger, their fruit smaller perhaps, but richer, more enduring against the next wind. The valley at night became its own parable, hills shaped by years of weather and time, stones smoothed by countless footsteps, olive trees twisted from enduring many seasons, each one bearing witness to a story of persistence and transformation. In the quiet glow of starlight, the land itself seemed to echo the message of the letter, that what is truly precious is not erased by hardship, but made more radiant through it. Back in the lamplit room, breaths continued to slow, shoulders eased further, as if an unseen hand gently pressed down the rising waves of anxiety. The letter's imagery of gold in the furnace lingered in their minds, and with it the image of a refiner, always watching, never absent from the heat, attentive to every shift in the flame, never allowing the fire to burn beyond what would bring forth beauty. They could picture it now. A craftsman seated near the coals, eyes narrowed not in anger, but in deep care, hand steady on the bellows, listening to the subtle language of crackle and glow. The metal did not understand the process, could not interpret each increase or softening of heat, but the refiner did, reading every sign, knowing exactly when the impurities had risen to the surface, when the dross had been skimmed away, when the reflection within the molten gold had become clear enough to bear the likeness of the one who tended it. For those gathered, this thought settled softly into their wearied spirits. They were not abandoned fragments tossed into random flames. They were held within a purposeful work, seen by one whose eyes never left them even when circumstances burned bright and hot around their fragile faith. A child who had curled quietly beside a parent now drifted closer to sleep, small chest rising and falling in an even rhythm, fingers loosely holding the edge of a worn garment. That simple peace, resting in the presence of those who watched over the night, painted yet another quiet picture of trust, of surrender that did not require understanding every detail of what tomorrow would bring. Several hearts in the room felt drawn to that image, sensing that trust in trial might be something like this: not the absence of questions, but the choosing to rest in a presence that remained, even when roads twisted and fires flared. Hope did not arrive as a sudden blaze tonight, not as a rush of excitement or a swift end to suffering. It appeared instead as a small, steady flicker, like the lamplight in their midst, like the first star appearing in a clouded sky, like a coal refusing to die out beneath ashes that only seemed cold on the surface. It was the hope that perhaps these trials were not empty corridors leading nowhere, but doorways into deeper knowing, deeper nearness, deeper transformation into something more precious than the world could measure or reward. The messenger rolled the parchment just slightly, not to close it, but to adjust his grip, as though signaling that the word was not finished, that more truth waited to be unfolded. The room breathed as one for a moment, a soft unison of inhaled and exhaled air, carrying with it the faint scent of oil and warm stone, mingling grief and comfort into something quiet and holy. In the valley, the fire pits in a few scattered courtyards had burned low, embers glowing beneath layers of ash, small hints of heat still pulsing with life. Somewhere a hand would soon stir those embers, coaxing flame again for warmth or meal, trusting that what looked nearly extinguished still held power to light and sustain. That unseen gesture of faith, trusting flame within hidden coals, was mirrored in the hearts within the house. Hearts learning once more that hope can survive long stretches of shadow, that faith refined in fire may look fragile but is in truth being prepared for a glory far beyond the reach of present pain. The night held them all in a gentle embrace. Valley and village, stream and olive tree, lamp and letter, sorrow and emerging hope, all gathered within the gaze of the one who called their tested faith more precious than any earthly gold. The night settled even more deeply around the valley, drawing its quiet veil over distant hills, softening every outline until the world felt wrapped in a single breath of stillness. Within the lamplight of the small room, something gentle had begun to rise among the hearts gathered there. Something like the faint memory of warmth lingering after a storm has passed. Not loud, not demanding, but present enough to soften the edges of weariness. The letter remained open upon the messenger's knees, its ink steady and sure, a quiet anchor in the room's center. Each line held a steady thread of truth, woven through with sorrow and hope alike, acknowledging the trials that pressed upon these early followers, yet lifting their gaze toward a joy that lived far beyond the reach of any present storm. It was not the kind of joy that shouted or sparkled with sudden brightness. It was a deeper joy, an older joy, the kind that was seeded long before hardships arrived, the kind that could survive the weight of grief and still breathe beneath it. A joy that remembered the faithfulness of God in past seasons, and whispered that the same faithfulness would rise again, even when circumstances had dimmed the horizon. One of the older men seated near the wall allowed his gaze to drift into memory, the lamplight reflecting softly in his eyes. He remembered a time when he had walked the long road to Jerusalem, weary from travel and yet filled with a strange anticipation, a sense that the journey held more than dust and heat. He had been younger then, strong and certain, carrying hopes he could not fully name. And though trials had chipped away at that certainty over the years, though sorrow had thinned his faith until it sometimes felt translucent, something within him still remembered the joy of that early journey, the joy of being called, the joy of believing that God saw him, knew him, walked beside him. That memory flickered now like a distant lantern in his spirit, a small reminder that joy was not gone, only waiting to be uncovered again beneath layers of hardship. Across the room, the woman who had listened so intently earlier rested her palm lightly over her heart, fingers pressing gently against the fabric of her garment. She too felt old memories rising, memories of laughter shared around clay cups, of evenings spent singing psalms while the sky turned soft and violet above them. There had been a time when her heart felt light, when hope felt not like something fragile in her grasp, but like a river running strong inside her. And though trials had narrowed that river, carving it into quieter channels, she realized now that the water still flowed, still shimmered unseen beneath the surface. The letter's message had stirred something she thought lost, a reminder that sorrow had not erased joy, only pressed it deeper, making it more durable, more precious. It was a joy no storm could truly extinguish, because its source was not circumstance, but presence. Outside, the valley held its own memories of joy, carried in the scent of wildflowers that once bloomed across the slopes in early spring. Though the night was still now, And the season changed. The earth remembered the colors that had touched it, the warmth that had soaked into its soil. Even the olive trees, twisted by time and weather, remembered seasons of abundant fruit, branches heavy with promise. Joy was written into the very land, not as a constant display, but as a truth woven through its long story. It slept beneath the surface, waiting for its moment to rise again when the time was right. A young follower near the window lifted his face slightly toward the night breeze drifting through the doorway. He remembered a day when he had carried baskets of bread to a hillside gathering, when laughter filled the air, when the teacher had spoken words so filled with life that even the birds fell silent to listen. That memory glowed within him now, something bright preserved in the midst of present trials. He realized that joy did not need to be felt constantly to remain real. It could live quietly in the heart, waiting to shine again after seasons of shadow. The messenger read the next lines softly, allowing them to settle into the quiet room. There is a joy set before you, a joy untouched by flames, a joy that belongs to the inheritance kept in heaven, where no trial can steal, no sorrow can dim, no storm can reach. Those words moved through the room like a soft wind stirring golden dust, illuminating every heart with a gentle shimmer of hope. The child who had been drifting into sleep stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering before settling again. The parent brushed a hand through the child's hair, slow, tender, protective. The simple touch carried its own radiance, a reminder that joy often lived in small gestures, in the quiet nearness of those who cared, in the shared comfort of being held within community. The letter had called their faith precious, more precious than gold refined in fire. But now, it also reminded them that joy was not something lost in trial, but something proven, strengthened, deepened by it. Joy that survived storms did not shine less brightly. It shone more truly, more honestly, like a lantern that continued to glow after wind had tested its flame. As the lamplight flickered again, the woman looked toward the doorway and noticed how the night sky had cleared just enough for a second star to appear alongside the first. 2 points of light. Gentle, steady, small perhaps, but unwavering. She felt her breath deepen at the sight, something inside her loosening even further. Those stars, faint though they were, reminded her that joy did not need to fill the whole sky to be real. It only needed to be present, even in the smallest measure. Slowly, quietly, she closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the moment wash through her, letting the memories of past joy mingle with the emerging hope for joy yet to come. In the soft quiet of that lamplit room, hearts were being prepared, not for the removal of trials, but for the remembrance that joy had roots deeper than sorrow, roots the fire could not burn away. The night breathed with them, valley and village, lamp and letter, all held together within the gentle hands of the one who promised joy beyond the storm. The lamplight burned lower now, settling into a deeper glow, the kind that pools softly at the center and stretches outward in warm fading rings. It cast a golden hue upon the woven mats, upon the tired sandals resting near the doorway, upon the bent heads and quiet forms gathered in the room. Outside, the sky held its two faint stars, steady and unmoving above the valley, their small brightness like gentle sentries watching over people learning again how to hope. The messenger allowed the silence to linger, not rushing to continue the letter, sensing that the hearts before him needed space to breathe, to let the earlier words settle like embers finding their rightful place within a fire. Each face in the room reflected a quiet shift, a softening, a settling, the subtle beginning of trust awakening from its dormancy. The woman in the corner lifted her eyes at last, her hands resting loosely now instead of clenched, her breath falling into a steadier rhythm. She felt something she could not fully name, a warmth beneath her ribs, a sense that her trials, though sharp and bewildering, were not signs of abandonment, but invitations into something deeper, something held within the hands of a refiner who saw beauty where she saw only brokenness. The young follower near the window traced the edge of the parchment again, his fingertips brushing lightly over the ink, marveling at how words written far away could reach across landscapes and sorrow to land precisely in the moment he needed them. He had felt tossed about lately, uncertain, stretched thin by responsibilities and fears he had not spoken aloud. But now, the imagery of the refiner's flame returned to him again and again. A patient craftsman leaning near the fire, watching the metal with unwavering attention, decreasing the heat when needed, increasing it only when it served the purpose of purification. The fire was not aimless, and neither were the trials pressing at the edges of his life. Outside, the valley wind shifted softly, brushing along the hillside with a whisper that carried the scent of distant fig trees and cool earth. It stirred the leaves of the olive trees, creating a faint rustling sound that echoed the language of the night, a language of surrender, of receiving rather than striving. The valley had endured generations of storms and sun alike, its soil shaped by forces it could not control, yet always held within the slow, patient work of time. Nothing in the valley was wasted. No rain, no heat, no season of barrenness. Even the hard seasons created depth, resilience, richness the eye could not see until new growth pushed through the surface. The messenger finally lifted the parchment and began reading again, voice low, even, gentle. Your faith, more precious than gold that perishes though refined by fire, shall result in praise, and honor, and glory, when the beloved is revealed. The words fell into the room like drops of warm oil, pooling in each heart, seeping into the hidden places where doubt had built its small walls. The older man near the wall inhaled slowly, his breath filling his chest in a way that felt almost new. He thought of the refiner's fire again. Imagined gold placed upon coals that burned bright and hot. The metal softening, impurities rising, the surface shimmering with changing colors. He imagined the refiner leaning close, eyes fixed upon the glowing metal, knowing precisely the moment when the fire had done its work, when the gold had become pure enough to reflect the refiner's face. A quiet realization moved through him. If his faith was being refined, if trials were the fire, then the one tending the flame must be nearer than he had ever imagined. Not distant, not indifferent, but close enough to feel every shift in the heat, close enough to protect what was precious, close enough to shape beauty from what felt like breaking. Nearby, the older woman folded her hands slowly, her fingers no longer trembling. She remembered times of deep sorrow when she felt utterly alone, when loss seemed to carve open her spirit like a sharp blade. Yet looking back now, she could see threads of care woven through those dark seasons. Small mercies that had surprised her. People who had arrived at the exact moment she needed them. Provisions that came when she had no explanation but grace. It had been a mystery then, and a mystery still, but one that pointed not to abandonment, but to a presence that worked quietly, faithfully, even in the shadows. The child sleeping beside the parent shifted again, a small sigh escaping his lips, a sound soft as a feather falling onto warm dust. The parent adjusted the edge of a cloak over him, not waking him, simply ensuring warmth remained. That gentle act mirrored the very heart of the message filling the room. The refiner's flame was real, but so was the refiner's care. The fire did not rage unattended. It was watched, guided, held within limits shaped by love rather than judgment. Across the valley, a shepherd tending his flock paused to rest upon a low stone wall, watching as a soft haze lifted over the nearest hill. He had kept his sheep through nights colder than this one, storms harsher, wolves nearer. He knew what it meant to guard something fragile in the darkness, to watch with unwavering eyes, to respond instantly when danger approached. He understood something of the refiner's heart through his own calling, a calling of vigilance, tenderness, and steadfast presence. If he, a simple shepherd, cared so faithfully, how much more the one who tended the hearts of his people? In the lamplit room, the messenger lowered the parchment again, letting the words breathe. He looked around at the faces before him, seeing in their eyes the beginning of something sacred, a surrender forming slowly, a quiet yielding to the mystery that had once frightened them. They did not understand all their trials, but they were beginning to trust the one who held them. They did not know why certain fires had come, but they were learning to believe that the refiner had not stepped away. They did not yet see the praise and honor and glory promised, but they sensed that something precious was taking shape within them, something the fire could not destroy. The night outside held its breath, listening. The stars shimmered faintly above the valley, like small reflections of a greater glory yet to be revealed. The lamplight glowed steadily, casting a soft warmth over the parchment, over the weary hearts gathered around it, over the embers of hope beginning to stir within the deeper shadows. The room felt held, sheltered, watched over by a presence that moved quietly, lovingly, faithfully through every corner. The refiner was near, and the mystery of his care wrapped gently around them like a warm cloak drawn close in the cool of night. The night deepened with a hush that seemed to press softly against the walls of the small room. A hush so complete that even the lamplight appeared to burn more quietly, as though it, too, sensed the delicacy of what was unfolding among the gathered hearts. The flame glowed with a slow rhythmic pulse, rising and settling, like breath finding steadiness after a long climb through shadow. Around it, forms rested in stillness, each one touched by the tender weight of reflection, each one leaning into the truth that had begun to open like a dawn-colored flower within the silence. The parchment lay open again, its edges illuminated by the lamplight, its ink carrying a steadfastness that seemed almost alive. The messenger held it gently, as though aware that these words were not mere ink on woven fibers, but threads of comfort stitched through the fabric of a people learning how to endure without collapsing. A quiet shift moved through the room, subtle as a change in the breeze. The older man near the wall straightened slightly, the movement small yet filled with meaning. He recalled chiseling stone in his youth, long days spent shaping rough surfaces into smooth planes. The way fire had been used to heat metal tools until they glowed, until they were ready for work that demanded precision and strength. The fire alone had not shaped the stone. It had shaped the tools, refining them so they could bear the pressure, so they could carve beauty from material once rigid and unyielding. His thoughts drifted toward his faith, realizing that the trials he had faced had done something similar, not destroying him, but preparing him, sharpening the edges of his devotion, teaching him patience, endurance, the slow art of steadfastness. At the opposite side of the room, the younger follower gazed toward the open doorway, watching the night breeze stir the edges of the hanging cloth. He saw the darkness beyond the threshold, soft and quiet, not threatening, but deep, stretching out into unseen corners of the valley. He had feared darkness in recent weeks, feared what he could not predict, feared the unknown shape of tomorrow. Yet tonight, as the words of the letter echoed in his spirit, Darkness no longer felt like an enemy, but like the space where transformation could happen unseen, where the fire of refinement could glow beneath the surface, where roots could deepen quietly in soil untouched by harsh midday sun. Outside, the valley carried its own quiet lessons. A lone hill torch flickered in the distance, its orange flame bending and stretching in the wind, its glow rising and falling like a heartbeat. The flame endured not because it was sheltered, but because it was tended. Someone had placed the torch there. Someone had kindled it. Someone had prepared it for the night's shifting winds. Even as gusts leaned against it, the flame steadied again, lifted again, reclaimed its shape again. The valley understood something the followers were only now beginning to see. That perseverance was not a matter of force, but of being held within a purpose greater than the fire itself. The woman in the corner let her eyes drift closed for a moment, her breath deepening in a way that felt anchored, grounded, safe. She had spent many nights wondering why her path had been marked by such intensity, such confusion, such sudden storms. But now, she could almost sense the outline of a different truth forming behind those experiences, like a mountain revealed gradually as fog lifts. Her trials had not erased her. They had revealed parts of her she did not know existed. Reservoirs of compassion, wells of courage, strengths forged not in ease but in surrender. Faith had felt thin before, but now she could feel its quiet resilience, something like gold glowing softly after passing through the furnace. The messenger's voice rose again, gentle, low, almost a whisper. For a little while, though grieved by many trials, the testing of faith produces something more enduring than gold, something that shines with honor and glory when the beloved is revealed. The words settled over the room like warm rain falling on dry ground, seeping into cracks no one else could see. A shift happened in those listening. Not loud, not sudden, but deep, like embers catching breath after being stirred. Their trials were not punishments, nor random flames, nor cruel burdens. They were spaces where faith was being shaped, strengthened, clarified, made pure enough to hold the weight of glory when the moment of revealing came. A subtle peace moved through the room, not replacing grief, not erasing questions, but wrapping quietly around them. It was the peace of knowing the fire was watched, the metal tended, the process guided by hands that never left the workspace. It was the peace of realizing that the furnace was not a place of abandonment, but a place of presence. Outside, the stars had multiplied, their shimmer soft yet persistent above the darkened valley. One star in particular gleamed with unusual steadiness, a small bright flame suspended in the vast canvas of night. It resembled gold in the fire, glowing with a radiance shaped by a source far beyond itself. Several in the room noticed the light spilling inward, touching the stone floor, brushing the edge of the parchment, mingling with the lamplight until the two glows became one. The valley, the sky, the quiet room, the gathered hearts, all held together in a single gentle truth. The fire may burn, but it does not destroy. The refiner is near, and faith, even trembling faith, is becoming something precious beyond measure. The lamplight flickered once more, steadying itself in a calm, unwavering glow. The room breathed in quiet unison, held by something sacred, something loving, something stronger than every trial whispered into the night. The quiet in the small lamplit room deepened, stretching gently across woven mats and tired shoulders like a soft fabric laid over the heart. Nothing moved quickly now. Not the flame, not the breath, not even the thoughts drifting slowly through the minds of those gathered. There was a hush that felt almost alive, as if the room itself had leaned closer to listen, to hold, to cradle the fragile, glowing truth settling into each spirit. The messenger rested the parchment lightly against his knees, his fingertips grazing its edges with reverence. The ink no longer felt like something merely written, but something planted, something rooted, like a seed pressed gently beneath soil waiting to be warmed by the rising sun. Across the room, a tear slid down the woman's cheek, catching the lamplight for just a moment before falling softly into the curve of her garment. She did not brush it away. There was no shame in it tonight, no embarrassment, no attempt to hide the evidence of a heart long stretched by sorrow. Instead, the tear felt strangely holy, not a sign of weakness, but a sign of release, of something being watered deep within her. She remembered seasons when tears had come in storms, overwhelming, relentless, leaving her drained rather than comforted. But this tear was different. Quiet, unhurried, like a drop of rain falling into parched ground, carrying with it the promise that the earth could still receive, still soften, still bring forth new life. Near the window, the younger follower noticed the tear, not with pity, but with a shared understanding. He too had prayed through nights when tears blurred his vision, nights when he felt pressed between responsibility and fear, when the weight of unspoken questions bent his posture forward as if in constant bow. He had often wondered whether those tears had any meaning, whether they vanished into the dust once the sun rose. Now, hearing the letter, seeing the quiet transformation in the room, he sensed that every tear had fallen with purpose, each one watering the seeds of trust hidden deep within places he had not known how to reach. Outside, the valley seemed to breathe with the same slow rhythm as the room. A soft night wind brushed across the slopes, stirring the leaves of the olive trees until they shimmered faintly in the starlight. Those trees had seen many seasons, many storms, many nights when rain had fallen heavy and soaked into their deep roots. They were shaped by those seasons, strengthened by them, their fruit enriched not by ease but by endurance. The valley understood the language of tears. It knew the way water moved through soil, carving paths unseen yet vital, bringing forth life that could not have come without the nourishment of rain. The older man near the wall let his eyes drift toward the floor, not in shame, but in gentle remembrance. He had stored tears for years, tucked them away in the corners of his heart, believing they were better hidden, believing that sorrow was to be carried silently like a burden kept beneath a cloak. But as he listened to the letter's words, as he watched the shift in those around him, he realized that perhaps tears were never meant to be hidden. Perhaps they were meant to be offerings, quiet drops that softened the hardened soil of the soul, allowing seeds of trust, courage, and revelation to take root. The messenger lifted his gaze, his voice soft when he finally spoke again, reading another line from the parchment. Though grieved, there is a praise rising in the heart, a joy that grows not after tears, but because of them. The words drifted through the room like incense, curling into corners, settling over bowed heads and open hands. A few more tears found their way down tired faces, not with despair, but with release. The atmosphere shifted once more, deepening the sense that the refiner's work was not only in the fire, but also in the softening, in the watering, in the quiet healing that happened when tears fell without resistance. In the valley, dew began forming along the grasses, tiny droplets appearing like 1,000 small testimonies of the night's gentle care. Each one caught the faintest shimmer of starlight, turning the dark earth into a quiet field of glistening blessings. These droplets would nourish the ground by morning, offering life where life seemed still. So it was with the hearts in the room. Every tear that fell tonight became like dew upon dry soil, preparing the spirit for something new to rise when dawn finally touched the horizon. The parent beside the sleeping child brushed a second blanket over the little one, slow and careful, making sure warmth was kept close. The sight of that tenderness stirred something within several who observed it, a reminder that the one who tended their tears also tended their hearts with the same gentle care. No sorrow was unnoticed. No cry had ever fallen into emptiness. Every tear had been gathered, treasured, and used to water something hidden and precious within them. The woman in the corner inhaled deeply, her breath trembling just slightly, but steadying as it left her lips. She felt lighter somehow, as though the tear she had let fall had loosened a knot tied tightly around her spirit. It was only one tear, small, fragile, but she sensed that it had opened a space within her, A space where hope could settle again, where trust could begin to grow like a small green shoot pushing through cracks in a desert stone. The young follower turned toward the lamplight, watching the flame bend, then rise again. He understood now that this was its rhythm, its surrender, its faithfulness. The flame did not resist being moved. It simply yielded to the wind, then stood again when the breeze passed. Tears felt like that now. Moments of yielding, of softening, of letting the heart bend, only to rise again with renewed strength after the release. A warmth spread through the room. Not physical warmth, but the warmth of recognition, of shared humanity, of a community realizing that trials had not isolated them, but woven them together with threads of compassion and resilience. This warmth carried with it the quiet knowing that faith, real faith, was not forged in dryness, but in surrender, in vulnerability, in the rain of tears that softened the ground of the soul. The messenger lowered the parchment slightly, letting a final silence expand around them. It was a silence filled with tenderness, with reverence, with the sense that something sacred had just taken place in the hearts of those gathered. Tears had begun the work that strength alone could not do. Outside, the valley rested under the shimmering gaze of countless stars, each one a reminder that even the smallest droplets of light held meaning in the vastness of the night. Inside, hearts rested under the gentle presence of the refiner, who used flame and water alike to bring forth what was precious, what was beautiful, what was enduring. The night rested fully over the valley now, a deep quiet wrapping itself around stone walls, narrow pathways, and the gently breathing forms gathered within the small lamplit room. The air held a softness that seemed to muffle even the faintest sound, turning every movement into something reverent, every breath into something sacred. Inside, the flame of the lamp swayed in a slow arc, its golden glow stretching across the room like a tender hand brushing lightly over weary hearts. The messenger kept the parchment open, his gaze lowered, not yet reading, giving the room time to settle again after the quiet release of tears. The silence that followed was not empty. It was shaped, living, a silence that held space for transformation, for reflection, for the slow unfolding of truths too delicate to rush. Near the doorway, the younger follower leaned his shoulder against the wall, eyes drifting upward toward the night sky beyond the threshold. The stars seemed clearer now, the earlier haze lifting enough for constellations to emerge like faint sketches traced across the heavens. He sensed something shifting within him, as though the trials he had carried so heavily were no longer pressing from every side, as though they had begun to loosen their grip, falling away in places where something deeper had taken root. It was not that the difficulties had disappeared, but their weight, their sharpness, felt changed. He felt the first fragile awareness that some things were temporary, passing, momentary flames that would burn out in their season. And perhaps, beneath those shifting circumstances, there was something untouched, something steady, something meant to endure. Across the room, the older woman folded her hands softly, palms warm now instead of cold with worry. Her heart had spent many days gripping tightly to the fear of losing what she loved, gripping tightly to memories that seemed to be slipping through her grasp. But tonight, a quiet understanding had begun to rise, that not everything was meant to be held forever, that some seasons, some attachments, some expectations were meant to fall away like dry leaves releasing themselves to the autumn wind. The falling away did not mean failure, nor abandonment, nor emptiness. It meant making space for the eternal, for the unseen, for the precious things that did not perish even when life changed its shape. The older man near the wall let his fingers drift across the floor beside him, feeling the grooves worn into the stone. He thought of how many feet had passed through this place before him, how many stories had risen and fallen, how many lives had moved like breath through generations of dust and hope. All of them had carried burdens, desires, moments of joy, moments of grief. And yet, everything temporary had eventually released its hold, leaving only what was eternal, what was shaped within the soul, what could not be taken by trial or time. The messenger finally lifted his head, and in the stillness, his voice emerged like a soft wind stirring warm sand. These trials, though heavy for a moment, are passing, making way for the glory that endures, the inheritance that does not fade, the truth that stands when all else falls away. The words unfurled slowly through the room, carried by the glow of the lamp and the gentle hush of starlit air. They settled deep, deeper than the words spoken earlier, reaching into hidden places, touching wounds that had long been held in silence. Outside, the valley held its own testimony of things falling away. The grasses that once grew tall in early summer now lay pressed low, their seeds already carried away by wind, preparing the earth for a new season. The fig trees stood in quiet rest, their branches bare of fruit for now, resting after the labor of bearing sweetness in the heat of earlier months. Even the distant torch on the hillside had burned low, its flame shrinking into a small glowing ember, slowly yielding to the night. Nothing resisted the turning of time. Nothing clung to what the season had already released. The valley breathed with acceptance, trusting the rhythms that shaped its slopes, trusting that what fell away made room for what would one day rise again. Inside, the woman closed her eyes, seeing in her mind the image of gold in the furnace, glowing, shifting, shedding what did not belong to its truest form. she realized that her own heart was doing the same. Certain fears, certain old stories, certain beliefs she had clung to desperately, were loosening their grip. They were no longer needed, no longer true, no longer part of what God was shaping within her. The falling away felt tender, not harsh, like a garment gently slipping from the shoulders when warmth finally fills the air. The younger follower felt a similar release within himself, as though the edges of his anxiety had begun to dissolve, washed away by the steady stream of hope that had entered the room. He understood now that not all trials were meant to be fought. Some were meant to be surrendered to, allowing the refiner's hands to remove what had grown heavy and unnecessary. The parent beside the sleeping child exhaled quietly, the soft breath brushing across the child's hair. The simple act reminded them of a deeper truth: that life was held moment by moment, breath by breath, and that the Eternal One did not ask them to carry everything into every season. Some burdens were meant to fall away as surely as the day gave way to night, and night would soon give way to dawn. The messenger lowered the parchment and let silence fill the space once more. This silence was different than before. It was not heavy, nor trembling, nor full of sorrow. It was spacious, open, almost luminous in its quietness. It carried the gentle knowing that not everything was meant to remain, and that this truth was not a loss, but a mercy. The room breathed as one, held in the soft glow of lamplight and the steady promise of God's refining love. What was temporary would fall away. What was eternal would remain. And faith, tender and tested, was being shaped into something that would endure long after the fires had cooled. Outside, the stars shimmered more brightly, as though the night itself leaned close, whispering that there was beauty even in release, even in surrender, even in the quiet falling away of what no longer served the soul. The lamplight glowed lower now. Its flame narrowed into a soft golden thread, weaving warmth across the quiet room like a final blessing laid gently upon the night. Shadows stretched long along the stone floor, softened by the slow flicker of light, moving in gentle rhythm with the hush that filled every corner. The air had changed again, not with a sudden shift, but with a deep, quiet knowing, a sense that something unseen had begun moving through the hearts gathered. Something tender, something steadfast. The parchment lay open still, the ink glimmering faintly beneath the lamp's glow. Its words had entered the room like seeds carried on the wind, settling into soil no one had realized was ready, waiting, longing to receive. Now, in the lingering silence after the falling away of temporary things, those seeds had begun to stir, hidden from sight, yet unmistakably alive. Near the wall, the older man rested both palms flat on the floor, feeling the coolness of the stone beneath his hands. It reminded him of mornings long ago, when he tended small fields at dawn, clearing ashes from fires that had burned through the night. Beneath those ashes, he had often found soil still warm, soil rich with the remains of what had been consumed, soil softened by heat and ready to nourish whatever was planted next. He realized now that his heart was not so different. Trials had burned fiercely, leaving ashes where certainty once stood, but beneath them lay a depth he had never seen before, a softness shaped by endurance, a soil ready for something new to take root. Across the room, the young follower breathed slowly, chest rising and falling with a rhythm that seemed to mirror the valley outside. He had spent weeks believing the fire of trial had scorched everything good within him, leaving only fragments, questions, emptiness. But tonight, beneath the ashes of fear and uncertainty, he sensed movement. Not dramatic, not loud, but subtle, steady, like the first tremor of a sprout pushing through dark earth toward a sun it had never seen. The hidden work of God did not announce itself. It whispered. It formed life beneath surfaces untouched by the eye, in places where silence protected the tender beginnings of transformation. The woman in the corner let her fingers brush over her garment once more. But this time the gesture was soft, thoughtful, almost reverent. Something within her had loosened earlier, and now she could feel the shift more clearly. A warmth rested deep inside, quiet yet present, like embers beneath ashes that still held heat, waiting for breath to awaken them into flame. She did not know what shape the next season of her life would take, but she sensed now that the sorrow she had carried had not been wasted. It had hollowed space for grace to enter, carved channels where compassion could one day flow, softened ground where trust could be planted. The refiner's work had never been only in the fire, but also in what the fire left behind. Outside, the valley carried its own testimony of hidden work. Beneath the surface of the soil, roots reached unseen into depths untouched by the cool night air. The grasses that looked pressed down and lifeless were gathering strength in their roots, storing the memory of rain and night dew, preparing quietly for seasons still to come. Olive trees, their trunks twisted and ancient, carried sap deep within their bark, flowing through unseen passages shaped by years of growth and struggle. Even the hillside torch, now only a faint ember, still held the potential for flame should a gentle breath awaken it. The valley lived its truths quietly, trusting what could not be seen as surely as what could. The messenger lifted the parchment once more, voice slow and steady in the lamplit hush. Though unseen now, the work is alive within, more precious than gold, shaped by fire, protected by love, waiting for its moment to shine with glory. The words flowed through the room like warm nectar, filling hollow spaces. soothing wounds, tracing gentle paths across the inner landscapes of those gathered. Something in the room shifted again. Not outwardly, but in the unseen places where transformation always begins. The older woman released a small sigh, light and subtle, as though something heavy had finally decided to loosen its hold on her. She realized that she had feared the silence within her, mistaking it for absence, for abandonment, for divine distance. But now, she sensed that the silence had never been empty. It had been sacred ground, the hidden workshop of God, where the refining fire had cooled into fertile soil, where new life was being shaped in ways she could not yet perceive. The young follower's eyes softened as he watched the light shift across the room. He thought of the times he had mistaken stillness for stagnation, waiting for outward signs of change while missing the quiet blossoming happening beneath the surface. He saw now that faith did not grow like a sudden blaze. It grew like roots, slow, secret, determined, shaped in darkness before it ever appeared in the light. The parent beside the sleeping child rested a gentle hand on the child's back, feeling the small rise and fall of breath beneath the blanket. Growth was like that too, slow, hidden, unfolding silently in the safety of night. One day the child would stand, speak, walk, become strong. But all those beginnings were happening now in ways no one could see. The same was true for the hearts gathered here. Their faith, tested and trembling, was being strengthened in ways invisible but real, shaped beneath the ashes of trial by hands that never left them for a moment. The messenger closed the parchment just slightly, enough to let the room breathe again. This time the silence that followed felt rich, full, like fertile earth after a long-needed rain. It was the silence of becoming, the silence of roots taking hold, the silence of the refiner's hidden work continuing long after the flame had cooled. Outside, the stars shimmered like small windows into glory, each one a reminder that much of the universe remained unseen, yet undeniably alive. And beneath those stars, the valley rested, trusting the quiet work happening in its depths. Inside, hearts rested too, trusting that beneath the ashes of loss and trial, something holy had begun to grow. The night had grown deeper still, settling into the valley like a soft tide returning to shore, touching stone and soil with a quiet that felt almost ancient. Inside the small room, the lamplight burned low but steady, a gentle witness to the slow unfolding of truth within the hearts gathered. The flame's glow had softened into something almost tender, a quiet hum of warmth weaving across faces now calmer, looser, marked by the subtle beginnings of peace. The parchment remained open, though no one spoke for a while. It seemed as if every heart needed time to absorb the mystery that had just been revealed. The truth that God was working beneath the ashes, shaping something precious in places unseen. In that silence, the room itself felt transformed, not by what was visible, but by what had begun to move beneath the surface of their souls, slow and sure as roots beneath winter soil. The younger follower shifted slightly near the doorway, his gaze drifting once more to the sky beyond the threshold. He noticed a faint shimmer near the horizon. Not dawn, not yet, but a pale glint of reflected starlight upon a thin veil of mist rising from the valley floor. It reminded him of something he had rarely allowed himself to believe, that even in the weakest moments, even when faith felt small and trembling, there was a glory hidden within it, waiting to be revealed at the right time. The trials he had faced had thinned his strength, but strangely, in that thinning, something else had begun to shine through. Something gentler, something eternal. Across the room, the older woman pressed her hand lightly against her chest, feeling the faint throb of her heartbeat beneath her palm. It was steady now, a slow, softened rhythm that felt different from the anxious pulse she often carried in her grief. Her sorrow was not gone, nor forgotten, but it felt as though someone had lifted its sharpest edge, allowing her to hold it without being pierced by it. She realized then that weakness had not disqualified her from God's work. It had simply made her more aware of His nearness. Every tremble, every tear, every moment when she thought her faith might break, had opened a space for divine strength to settle in, quiet and unseen. The older man near the wall closed his eyes briefly, letting his breath move slow and deep. He had always prided himself on resilience, on standing firm through hardship, on holding his faith with strong, unwavering hands. But now, he could see that his strength had never been the source of his endurance. The refiner had been the one sustaining him, guiding the fire, shaping the gold within him. And in the moments when his hands felt weak, when his grip loosened and he feared losing everything, those were the moments when unseen glory had shimmered most clearly. Not glory of accomplishment, but glory of surrender. The quiet radiance of a soul learning to rest in God's hands instead of carrying everything in its own. Outside, the valley carried its own version of that truth. A thin mist had begun to rise from the stream, curling slowly upward and catching the faint starlight as it moved. The mist shimmered with a subtle, ghost-like glow, almost invisible, yet undeniably beautiful. It carried the memory of water warmed by the day, rising into cool night air, transformed into something delicate, luminous, transient but full of quiet meaning. Even the valley knew how to hold weakness with dignity, how to let small and fragile things shine without forcing them to become something else. The messenger lifted the parchment again, his voice soft as he read the next line. "You love him though you have not seen him. And though you do not see him now, you believe. And in this believing, a joy beyond words begins to rise. The words floated into the room like a gentle tide, touching every heart with tenderness. The message was not one of perfect vision or perfect strength, but of trust in the unseen. Trust carried in trembling hands. Trust whispered through weary breath. This was the glimmer of unseen glory. Not a blaze that filled the room, but a quiet radiance that grew in the hidden spaces of the soul. The woman in the corner let her tears fall again, softer this time, without the sharp sting of earlier sorrow. They felt like dew now, not storm rain, gentle droplets that cleansed rather than overwhelmed. Her weakness no longer frightened her. She could sense now that God met her most intimately in those fragile places, working beneath the ashes, weaving glory through what she had once believed was broken beyond repair. The young follower's hands rested limply on his knees, palms open, fingers relaxed. He felt something stir in that openness, a small warmth, a quiet strength, not his own, but given, resting lightly within him like a seed catching first light. He understood in that moment that the weakness he feared most was the very doorway through which divine presence flowed most freely. The parent beside the sleeping child leaned closer, watching the small rise and fall of the child's breath. Sleep was its own kind of glory, a surrender so complete that even fear could not hold its place. The child trusted the night without knowing what lay within it, trusted the breath moving in and out, trusted the unseen arms keeping watch. There was a lesson there, quiet and profound. That faith did not need perfect understanding to shine. It only needed a heart willing to rest. Outside, the stars above the valley shimmered like countless small promises, each one whispering that glory was not always loud, not always immediate, not always seen in the light of day. Sometimes it glowed faintly in darkness, flickering like a small flame sheltered in cupped hands. Steady, gentle, alive. The messenger closed the parchment halfway, not finished, but pausing to let the words settle. The room felt warmer, fuller, as though every heart had begun to glow with a light that did not come from the lamp. Weak hands now held something precious, a quiet joy, not loud or triumphant, but deep, like a slow-burning ember in the soul, waiting for the right moment to burst into fuller flame. The glory of God was not far, not distant, not unreachable. It shimmered quietly within them, in surrender, in trust, in every small act of faith that rose from weakness rather than strength. The night had grown so still that even the soft rustle of leaves outside seemed to pause, as though the valley itself held its breath in reverence. Within the small room, the lamplight dipped lower, drawing the shadows closer around its golden core, yet never losing its steady glow. That small flame had become a companion to the hearts gathered there, reflecting something of their own journey, fragile in form, unwavering in purpose, rising again and again even as the night deepened. The parchment rested now against the messenger's hand, half open, as though it, too, waited for the next unfolding of truth to be received. Not rushed, but welcomed with gentleness. A quiet warmth filled the air, the kind that rose not from heat, but from recognition, from the dawning awareness that something sacred had begun to emerge within them. Something shaped not despite the suffering they had endured, but through it. Near the wall, the older man inhaled deeply, his breath slow, steady, almost reverent. He remembered the hardest season of his life, when sorrow had pressed upon him like thick smoke, clouding every step, turning every thought into ash. For a long time, he believed that season had weakened him beyond repair, hollowed him out in ways he feared could never be restored. But tonight, in the quiet glow of the lamplight, he saw that the hollowness had become a vessel, a space carved not by destruction, but by divine intention. Out of that emptiness had risen compassion he never knew he possessed, patience shaped not by ease but by endurance, tenderness born from the memory of his own trembling. His faith had not survived the fire by clinging to strength, but by yielding to the one who tended the flame. What once seemed like smoke choking out the light now revealed itself as the very moment when faith began to rise within him. Shaped, tested, purified. The older woman folded her hands over her lap, her fingers resting lightly against each other. No longer clenched, no longer guarding the ache they once hid. Her heart had known suffering that lingered like bitter smoke, the kind that seeped into the corners of memory and refused to lift. But now, as she breathed in the stillness, she sensed that the smoke had thinned, lightened, revealing the quiet radiance that had survived the burn. She realized that suffering had not simply scarred her. It had carved depth within her, depth that made room for compassion, for wisdom, for a gentleness that could only be learned through vulnerability. And rising from that depth, fragile yet undeniable, was faith, no longer shaken by every shifting wind, no longer threatened by silence, but steady in its new and quiet strength. Across the room, the young follower sat with his palms still open, fingers relaxed against his knees. The trials he had faced were fresh, the smoke of them still clinging to his thoughts. But as he watched the lamplight dance, he sensed something stirring within the very remnants of those difficulties. It was faint, like the first curl of smoke rising from newly kindled embers. But it was there, a resilience he had not recognized before, a hope that flickered not in defiance of the fire, but because of it. His suffering had not been meaningless, nor wasted, nor ignored. It had become the soil from which a deeper trust began to rise. Slowly, quietly, shaped by the unseen hand that never left him in the heat of it. Outside, the valley offered its own quiet parable of faith rising from what appeared devoid of life. The ashes left behind by recent campfires still held faint traces of warmth beneath their surface. Small golden threads of heat waiting for breath or spark to awaken them. Even the ground beneath those ashes was richer now, darkened by what had been consumed, softened by what had burned away. Life would return there, not in spite of the fire, but because of it. Seeds would take root more deeply in soil refined by flame. Roots would reach further where the earth had been opened by heat. New growth would emerge where the old had been transformed. The messenger lifted the parchment again, his voice soft but steady, carrying the next line into the listening room. The tested faith rises, becoming praise, becoming honor, becoming glory, shaped not by strength alone, but by every moment endured within the flame. The words seemed to shimmer in the light, carrying with them a kind of quiet awe. They did not celebrate suffering, nor diminish its weight. Instead, they revealed its mystery, the way God could bring forth beauty from what felt broken, strength from what felt fragile, glory from what had passed through fire. The parent near the sleeping child brushed a thumb gently over the child's hand, marveling at how small and soft the fingers were. The child had never faced fire, yet one day would. And when that time came, the parent hoped the child would discover the same truth unfolding in the room tonight. That faith did not rise because life was easy, but because love held it through every difficulty. The parents' eyes softened as they watched the gentle rise and fall of breath, remembering that even breath carried its own quiet refinement. Each inhale a gift, each exhale a release. The woman near the corner lifted her gaze toward the lamp, watching the flame bend, then steady again. It reminded her that faith did not remain unchanged when tested. It bent, it flickered, it thinned under pressure. But in rising again, even after being shaken, it revealed a strength deeper than endurance, a strength woven with grace. A faith that rose from suffering was not brittle, but luminous, not boastful, but humble, not fragile, but precious. The messenger lowered the parchment slightly, allowing silence to settle once more. This silence felt different again, warmer, fuller, like a space cleared for something holy to breathe within it. It held the weight of realization, the weight of grace, the weight of a truth that wrapped itself around each heart like a cloak drawn close in cold night air. Faith was rising within them, Not loudly, not swiftly, but surely, rising like smoke that carried warmth upward, rising like embers that refused to die, rising like a quiet song born from a heart that had endured the fire and yet still glowed with hope. Outside, the valley held its peace. The stars shimmered with gentle clarity, and the night whispered its ancient secret. That what is tested, when held in the refiner's hands, becomes something beautiful, something lasting, something more precious than gold. The room had fallen into such profound stillness that even the lamplight seemed to breathe with the gathered hearts. Rising softly, falling softly, its glow deepening into a warmth that touched every face with gentle gold. Outside, the valley rested beneath a tapestry of stars, each one shimmering with a steady faithfulness. Each one a quiet reminder that light could dwell even in the deepest hours of night. Inside, something tender had begun to awaken. Not loud, not sudden, but present in the way shoulders loosened, in the way breath deepened, in the way eyes softened with a recognition they had longed for without knowing how to name. The messenger held the parchment at his lap, but did not yet speak. There was a shift happening in the room, a quiet drawing in of hearts no longer merely hearing the message, but leaning into it, opening to it, receiving it like warm oil soothing a long aching wound. It was as though the flame of the lamp had grown brighter not by fuel, but by the quiet radiance beginning to rise within the souls gathered around it. The older woman sat with her hands gently clasped, her fingers relaxed, her shoulders finally unburdened of the tension she had carried for so long. She felt a tenderness within her, fragile yet unmistakable, like a soft glow appearing through heavy fog. It was not the memory of past joy, nor the weight of past sorrow, but something that felt alive in this very moment, something present, something near, a presence she had sought in her long nights of grief, a presence she feared she had lost, yet now felt closer than breath. A warmth that did not come from the lamp, a steadiness that did not come from her own strength, a whisper of love rising through her heart like dawn rising over distant hills. She did not see him with her eyes, yet she sensed him with a certainty deeper than sight. The one who walked through fire with his people, the one who stood in furnaces hotter than any trial they faced, the one whose footsteps could be heard only by the quieted soul, was near. The older man pressed a hand to his chest, feeling its steady rhythm, a rhythm that had weathered seasons of turmoil and loss. He remembered moments when the fire of suffering had blazed so fiercely that he feared he stood alone within it, abandoned, unseen. Yet now, as the messenger prepared to read again, he could sense a different truth rising. In the very center of his hardest moments, a presence had stood with him, not removing the fire, but transforming it, not preventing the flames, but ensuring they did not consume him. The one who had shaped his faith into something steadier than stone had not been a distant observer. He had been there, within the firelight, within the smoke, within the trembling, shaping the man even when he felt too weak to stand. Across the room, the young follower blinked against the soft glow of the lamp. His eyes warmed by the light. His spirit warmed by a truth he had barely dared to imagine. He had believed for so long that suffering meant distance, that trials meant absence, that silence meant he walked alone through the valley. But now, with every breath, with every flicker of the lamplight, he sensed that presence had never left. It had simply been hidden within the very places he feared most. In the dark corners of uncertainty, in the aching spaces of unanswered questions, in the trembling of his hands when he no longer knew how to pray. There had been another standing beside him, steady as flame, gentle as breath, near as heartbeat. The messenger finally lifted the parchment, his voice slow and warm, though unseen. The beloved is near, closer within trial, nearer within fire, revealing glory not beyond the suffering, but within it. The words unfolded like a soft wind moving through tall grass, bending it gently, tenderly, reshaping it into a rhythm aligned with peace. A warmth spread through the room, not the heat of the flame, but the warmth of recognition. They were beginning to understand that the one they loved did not wait for them on the other side of their trials. He entered those trials with them. He walked within the fire, not removing its heat, but ensuring it purified rather than destroyed. Outside, the valley echoed this truth in its own quiet language. A faint mist rose from the stream, its silver shimmer catching the glow of distant torches before drifting gently into the night. Mist was a fragile thing, easily scattered by wind, yet it rose steadily, bearing light within its delicate form. In the same way, hearts touched by suffering could rise with a soft radiance, carrying within them the very presence that had sustained them through the fire. The older woman breathed deeply, her breath trembling just slightly as she felt the nearness of the one she had longed for. It was not a vision, nor a sound, nor a sudden revelation. It was the quiet certainty that love was closer than her sorrow, closer than her tears, closer than every trial that had pressed upon her life. A love that had never turned away from her weakness, never abandoned her trembling, never failed her even in seasons she misunderstood the silence. The younger follower felt his hands warm where they rested upon his knees, as though unseen fingers had closed gently around them, steadying him. His faith had been thin, fragile, often wavering, yet the presence he sensed now did not recoil from that fragility. Instead, it honored it, held it, cradled it like a precious ember hidden beneath layers of ash. The parent leaned close to the sleeping child, listening to the quiet rhythm of breath, feeling a tenderness that almost brought tears. They sensed now that this same tenderness had been offered to them in their hardest nights, even when they did not recognize it. That the one who watched over their child watched over them too, with a care deeper than any they could offer. The messenger lowered the parchment, but kept it close, knowing the next words would open yet another door into the mystery of divine nearness. The room brightened just slightly, not by the lamp, but by something rising within the hearts now touched by sacred recognition. Jesus was not beyond their trials, but within them, not waiting for their victory, but shaping it, not distant from their suffering, but walking its every step beside them. Their faith, tested and trembling, was beginning to rise again, not through their own strength, but through the presence shining quietly within the fire. The night pressed gently against the walls of the small room, a deep, velvety stillness woven from shadow and starlight. Inside, the lamplight burned low and warm, its gentle glow stretching across weary faces that now carried the quiet imprint of nearness, the subtle radiance of hearts touched by presence within the fire. The flame flickered once, twice, as though stirred by something unseen, then steadied again, holding its small circle of light with unwavering devotion. The messenger rested the parchment against his knees, his eyes soft, sensing that the hearts before him were entering a new place, a place where sorrow and praise could breathe together. This was not the loud praise of festival crowds, nor the triumphant chants of victory. This was the praise that rose from trembling lips, from weak hands, from hearts shaped by suffering yet held by love. Near the wall, the older man exhaled a long, slow breath, and something inside him gave way, not in breaking, but in release. He lifted his head just slightly, eyes glistening in the lamplight. For years he had believed praise required strength, confidence, the ability to stand tall with steady voice and steady heart. But now, as warmth spread through his chest, he sensed that the truest praise often rose from the most fragile places, from the ashes of endurance, from the quiet yes whispered through shaking breath. He felt his lips part, not to sing, but simply to offer a small whisper of gratitude, a gratitude shaped by the realization that God had been nearer than his sorrow, nearer than the flames, nearer than every fear he had carried alone. Across the room, the older woman felt her throat tighten, not with grief this time, but with awe. She had spent many nights too weary to speak, too burdened to pray, too broken to form words of hope. But now, in the stillness, she sensed a song rising within her, not a melody the ear could hear, but a gentle vibration of the soul, a praise born in the place where suffering and love met. Her voice trembled as she breathed it out, barely audible, yet full of sacred truth. It was not the strength of the sound that mattered, but the willingness of her heart to look beyond the wound and see the one who had walked with her through every step of it. Near the doorway, the young follower placed a hand over his chest, feeling its gentle tremor beneath his palm. His faith had felt faint for so long, flickering like a candle in harsh wind. But tonight, in this room filled with quiet revelation, he sensed a deeper pulse within him, a gratefulness shaped not by understanding, but by encounter. He whispered a small word of praise, one that felt both fragile and eternal, like a spark carried in cupped hands. His voice shook, but his heart lifted. The messenger finally raised the parchment, reading another line with soft reverence. Though your faith trembles, it becomes praise, rising toward the one unseen, forming glory from the very places you feared were empty. The words drifted into the room like a warm breeze, brushing across bowed heads, stirring the edges of garments, awakening something long dormant. For a moment, no one moved. The praise within them was too delicate, too new, too tender to be rushed. Outside, the valley echoed the same truth in its own quiet language. A faint wind moved through the olive trees, creating a shimmering whisper along their silver-green leaves. The sound was soft, almost ethereal, like a chorus formed by branches bending together in gentle reverence. It was not loud, but it was beautiful. Praise did not need volume to be heard by heaven. Along the ground, dew continued to gather on grasses and stones, tiny pearls of light catching the glow of distant torches. Each droplet reflected a small shimmer of the sky above, turning the valley floor into a quiet canvas of glistening praise. Unseen glory, rising in small, trembling, shining fragments. Inside the room, the child slept on, breath soft and steady, a faint sigh escaping now and then. Even in slumber, even without words, the child's very rest was its own kind of praise, a trust so complete that fear could not find a place within it. Several hearts noticed this, sensing that praise was not always spoken, but lived, breathed, held within vulnerability and surrender. The older woman lifted her gaze slightly, her eyes reflecting the soft flame. She understood now that praise was not the opposite of sorrow, but its companion. That the moments when the heart trembled were often the moments when praise could arise most honestly. Her lips moved again in a whisper, a simple offering carried upon trembling breath. It felt like giving back a small part of what God had poured into her tonight, a fragile echo of the grace she had received. The older man glanced toward the younger follower. their eyes meeting briefly. No words passed between them, yet both recognized the same truth reflected in each other's gaze. That praise did not require certainty, or completeness, or strength. It only required a heart willing to lift itself toward light, even while standing in shadow. The messenger's voice lowered again as he set the parchment gently in his lap. Silence settled once more, but this silence hummed with life, with gratitude, with the soft shimmering glow of praise shaped by trial. It was the kind of silence that felt holy, the kind that wrapped itself around the soul like warm linen, comforting, steadying, healing. Outside, the stars shimmered brightly, as though heaven itself leaned close to listen. Inside, the hearts of the weary glowed softly with a new radiance, light rising from weakness, praise rising from trembling hands, glory rising from places once scorched by sorrow. The lamplight trembled once more, a delicate sway, as though bowing gently to the quiet praises that had risen moments before. Its glow felt warmer now, richer, stretching across the room in a soft golden arc that rested tenderly over bowed heads and steady breaths. Outside, the night had reached its deepest point, the valley wrapped in a darkness so complete and peaceful that even the stars seemed to linger in reverent stillness. Within the small room, every heart felt suspended between what had been endured and what was yet to be revealed. Not in a sense of burden or fear, but in a gentle awareness that the story of their faith extended far beyond their present sorrow. The trials they faced, the tears they shed, the trembling prayers whispered into the silence, all of it was being woven into a glory they could not yet see. The messenger held the parchment again, its edges illuminated with a soft halo of light. He read slowly, allowing each word to fall like dew upon open spirits. The faith tested now shall become praise and honor and glory at the revealing of the Beloved One. The words drifted into the room with a hush that felt almost tangible. Honor, glory, praise. These were not weights, not demands, not distant rewards for perfect saints. They were tender promises, prepared gently, lovingly, for hearts that had endured the flame and still reached upward toward light. Near the wall, the older man lifted his face into the glow. He had spent so much of his life measuring himself by strength, by endurance, by how well he appeared to stand firm in trial. But these words wrapped around him with unexpected softness. Honor was not something he had to earn through unwavering strength. Glory was not something reserved for those who carried burdens without trembling. Praise was not something withheld until he finally had perfect trust. All of it was being formed through the very trials that had humbled him, through the suffering that had softened him, through the weakness he once tried so hard to hide. He saw now that what he thought disqualified him had actually prepared him. The smoke of his suffering had not obscured God's work. It had revealed it. The ashes he carried were not marks of failure. They were the soil from which future radiance would rise. Across the room, the older woman felt her breath catch softly. Glory had always seemed far away to her, something reserved for others, for the strong, for the certain, for those who did not tremble beneath the weight of grief. Yet as the lamp warmed her features, she felt something shift. The honor spoken of in the letter was not for the unbroken. It was for the faithful, for the ones who endured, for the hearts that continued to hope even through tears. It was for her. Not because her path had been easy, but because her faith had survived the fire. She realized with a quiet awe that every moment she had continued to trust, tired, tearful, uncertain, had been shaping a glory she would one day behold with unveiled eyes. Near the doorway, the young follower's gaze lifted toward the stars beyond the threshold. Those distant lights shimmered quietly, each one a small echo of a far greater radiance. He imagined what it would be like on the day the beloved one was revealed. The day when what was hidden would be made visible, when what was planted in darkness would burst forth in brilliance. He thought of the trials that had burdened him, the nights he had spent wrestling with fear, the moments he had doubted his own worth. Now, he sensed that none of those moments would be lost. Every trial, every trembling prayer, every small act of faith rising from weakness, would become part of something luminous beyond anything he could imagine. Outside, the valley began to change subtly. A faint light touched the eastern horizon. Not dawn, but the first whisper of its coming. The darkness did not retreat yet, but it had begun to thin at its edges. The valley seemed to hold its breath in anticipation, as though aware that light was preparing to rise beyond the ridge. This mirrored the stirring within the hearts inside the room. They had walked through deep night, pressed through fire, waited beneath shadows. But now, a glimmer of something promised moved through them, like the first bright thread of dawn pulling gently on the night's heavy curtain. The messenger lowered the parchment, allowing the room to sit within the weight of the promise. Honor, glory, praise, not as distant dreams, but as realities already forming within them. Realities shaped by their trials, refined by their tears, carried by a love that had never left them. The older man let his eyes close, a small, grateful exhale leaving his chest. He no longer feared the fire that had tested him. He no longer believed suffering had erased his value. He understood now that every moment he had endured with trembling faith was shaping something far more beautiful than he could see. The older woman pressed a hand over her heart, feeling the warmth that had settled there. She recognized now that the grief which once hollowed her had also created space for compassion, for depth, for glory she could not yet behold. Her sorrow had not disqualified her. It had made room for honor. The young follower's eyes filled with quiet awe. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but he sensed that his story would not end in trial, nor in smoke, nor in ash. It would end in glory. Not glory he created, but glory prepared by the one who tended his faith through every trembling step. Outside, the horizon glimmered again, a subtle shimmer like gold beneath the dark sky. Inside, the hearts of the weary carried that same shimmer, a quiet radiance waiting to be fully revealed. The room had grown so still that even the lamplight seemed to pause, holding its gentle flame in a moment of reverent suspension. Outside, the valley rested beneath its deep cloak of night, but along the far horizon, a faint breath of pale gold hovered, the first quiet murmur that dawn would one day come. Inside, hearts long pressed by trial felt the smallest stirrings of warmth, like embers hidden beneath ash, waiting for the right breath to glow again. The messenger held the parchment close, his fingertips resting lightly along its fragile edge. He did not speak immediately, for the silence in the room had become its own kind of teacher, its own quiet sanctuary, its own tender space where truth could settle without being hurried. The older man near the wall let his palms rest loosely against his knees, feeling a new steadiness in his breath. He remembered seasons when pain had seemed meaningless, random, cruel. Seasons when he believed his suffering had no purpose, when sorrow felt like an empty wound with no healing in sight. But now, sitting within the soft glow of the lamp, listening to the gentle rise and fall of breath throughout the room, he sensed a truth unfolding with delicate clarity. None of what he had carried so heavily had been wasted. The tears he once thought had fallen unnoticed, the questions whispered into darkness, the grief pressed into the marrow of his days, all of it had been held, shaped, used. Not to break him, but to deepen him. Not to destroy him, but to form a strength gentle enough to heal others, and a humility that glowed like gold refined slowly through night after night of quiet endurance. Across the room, the older woman closed her eyes, allowing her hands to soften in her lap. She felt the weight of her past, not as a burden now, but as a story being rewritten by unseen hands. The moments that once seemed barren, hollow, purposeless, began to gleam faintly with new meaning. Her loneliness had taught her compassion. Her sorrow had carved space for tenderness. Her waiting had stretched her trust until it reached depths she never knew existed. The fire had been painful, at times overwhelming, but it had not been pointless. Every moment had been held by the one who walked with her. Every tear had watered something sacred beneath the surface. Every silence had become a shelter where her soul learned to listen. Near the doorway, the young follower tilted his head back slightly, resting it against the wall as he breathed in the cool night air drifting through the opening. He remembered the days when he felt buried beneath pressure, when he thought his failures marked the end of his usefulness, when he believed his weakness disqualified him. But tonight, something gentle unfolded within him, blooming slowly, quietly, like a flower opening in dim first light. The trials he had endured, though confusing and difficult, had shaped him in ways he had not recognized. They had softened pride, humbled certainty, strengthened roots, and revealed a depth of trust he did not know he possessed. His pain was not wasted. It had been woven into a purpose he could not yet see, but could sense now in the fragile warmth rising within his spirit. Outside, the valley revealed its own quiet testimony. The ashes left behind by earlier fires had darkened the soil beneath them, enriching it, transforming what looked lifeless into a cradle for new growth. Small green shoots, barely visible, pressed through the ground where flames had once raged. Life was rising from what had been consumed. Even the earth understood that nothing surrendered to fire remained unchanged, and nothing touched by flame was overlooked. Inside, the sleeping child shifted beneath the blanket, a small sigh escaping into the stillness. The parent brushed a gentle hand across the child's hair, a movement so soft it barely disturbed the air. Witnessing such tenderness stirred something deep within those watching. If a human parent could hold such care, even for a small moment, how much more had the divine parent held every moment of their suffering with careful attention? The messenger lifted the parchment and read again, voice low, steady, carrying the weight of gentle truth. This faith, tested through trials, shall be found more precious than gold, for nothing endured in the fire is wasted in the eyes of the one who refines. The words drifted through the room like warm mist, entering the spaces softened by silence, weaving themselves into the fibers of hope beginning to knit together inside each heart. It was as though something long hidden began rising within them, a quiet courage, a sacred acceptance, a peaceful understanding. Not that the fire was good, but that God was good within it. Not that suffering was desired, but that suffering was not ignored. Not that pain was the purpose, but that pain had been transformed into a gentle teacher in the hands of the refiner. The older woman's breath trembled softly, but her eyes shone with the beginning of deep clarity. None of her losses were wasted. None of her nights were forgotten. None of her sorrows dissolved into nothing. They had been gathered, every one, and woven into a story that pointed not to despair, but to redemption. The older man swallowed gently, his throat tightening with emotion that did not hurt, but relieved. What once felt brutal now felt meaningful. Not because the pain itself was beautiful, but because the one who walked with him had shaped beauty from its remnants. The young follower felt warmth settle into his chest, softer than fire yet deeper than breath. He saw now that his journey was not defined by his failures, but by the one who met him within them. Every moment he believed himself lost, he had been carried. Every moment he feared himself broken, he had been shaped. The messenger lowered the parchment and allowed silence to fill the room again. This was not a silence of sorrow, nor of emptiness. It was a silence of revelation. A silence filled with the quiet assurance that none of their pain, none of it, had been forgotten, neglected, or wasted. Outside, along the horizon, the pale shimmer grew just slightly brighter, a soft hint of the dawn that would one day rise fully. Inside, the hearts gathered around the lamp carried that same shimmer, a gentle glow of understanding rising from endurance. The night rested in its deepest quiet now, a stillness so complete that it seemed to cradle the room in gentle, unseen arms. The lamplight had softened into a low, steady ember, its glow no longer bright but warm, unwavering, like a heartbeat flickering in the center of the gathering. Outside, the valley lay hushed beneath the last hours of darkness, its slopes hidden in shadow, its air cool and tender, its silence filled with a calm that felt almost sacred. Inside the small room, something within each heart had shifted. The ache of trial still lived within them, but it no longer pressed with the old heaviness. A softness had come, a loosening, a surrender that felt less like defeat and more like being gently lowered into strong and loving hands. The messenger rested the parchment upon his lap, letting the hush settle deeply before speaking. There was no need to rush now, for the hearts before him had entered a quiet ripening, a tender readiness for the next unfolding of truth. Near the wall, the older man lifted his eyes slowly, a hint of shimmer resting within them. All his life, he had believed endurance meant holding on as tightly as possible, gripping the rope until his hands ached, refusing to let go even when his strength trembled. But tonight, in this room filled with gentle revelation, he sensed another path. One where letting go was not a failure, but a form of trust. One where surrender was not weakness, but wisdom. One where the hands that held the flame were also the hands that held him. He exhaled a breath he had carried for years, letting it out slow, letting it take with it the tension he had gripped with silent determination. Across the room, the older woman's shoulders softened, her posture easing into the mat beneath her. She had spent so long trying to carry everything: grief, responsibility, unanswered questions, tucked tightly against her heart as though release would mean losing control. But now, she could sense those very burdens being lifted, gently, quietly, as though hands unseen were reaching beneath the layers and helping her loosen her grip. Her breath deepened, soft as a lullaby, her fingers uncurled from the place they had held her sorrow. Letting go was not abandonment of what mattered. It was entrusting it to the one who had carried her long before she knew she needed to be carried. At the doorway, the young follower rested his head against the wooden frame, eyes half-lidded, the night air brushing lightly against his skin. He had feared surrender, feared that letting go meant losing himself, or losing everything he was trying so hard to protect. But now, he sensed a different truth stirring. Letting go meant allowing the refiner to take over where his strength ended. Letting go meant releasing the illusion of control he never truly held. Letting go meant stepping into a peace he had longed for but never fully allowed himself to receive. His heartbeat slowed, steady and quiet, as though aligning itself to a deeper rhythm. The messenger raised the parchment, reading softly into the warm hush. The one who watches the flame does not ask for perfect strength, only trust, for the heart is safest when it rests in the hands that shape it. The words floated gently through the room, each one settling deeper than the last. They did not demand effort. They invited surrender. A new stillness filled the space, thicker, warmer, like a blanket drawn softly over a weary soul. Outside, the valley breathed its own song of surrender. The trees swayed with slow, unhurried movements, their branches yielding to the night breeze rather than resisting it. The stream flowed without striving, moving with the contours of the land, letting gravity carry it toward places it could not yet see. Even the darkness itself seemed to rest in the promise of coming light, not rushing dawn, but trusting its arrival. The entire valley seemed to echo the quiet truth rising within the room. Surrender was not losing, it was being held. Inside, the older man closed his eyes, imagining himself placed gently into the refiner's hands, not thrown, not forgotten, but held with careful, attentive love. He saw the fire before him, glowing, bright, fierce, yet no longer terrifying. For beside it, guiding it, calming it, stood the one who knew exactly how much heat was needed to shape beauty without harm. He realized now that letting go meant trusting those hands more than he trusted his fear. The older woman rested both hands over her heart, feeling its softened thrum. She sensed her grief loosening, not disappearing, but resting. As though the burden she once carried alone had now found its place in the hands that had waited patiently to receive it. The young follower's breath fell into a slow, rhythmic cadence, his mind quieting, his spirit settling. He no longer felt the need to understand everything. It was enough to know he was held. The messenger lowered the parchment again, letting silence expand until it felt like a sanctuary in itself. A sanctuary built not of stone or wood, but of surrender. Each heart rested in it, wrapped in a peace so gentle it almost felt like dawn brushing the horizon. Nothing had been resolved outwardly, the trials still existed, the world outside still carried its shadows. But something within had shifted. Something had been released. Something had been entrusted. Something had been placed quietly, fully, into the hands that held the flame. Outside, the faint glow along the horizon brightened imperceptibly, the first whisper of returning light. Inside, that same whisper glowed within each soul, soft as embers, steady as breath. The night lingered in its deepest quiet, wrapped around the valley like a gentle cloak, cool and soft as a whispered blessing. Inside the small room, the lamplight had settled into a faint, steady glow, no longer flickering with effort, simply burning in quiet faithfulness, its remaining flame resting in the certainty of the oil that sustained it. The hearts gathered around it mirrored that stillness, each one softened, unclenched, drifting into a deeper calm that felt almost like being cradled. The messenger held the parchment loosely now, fingers relaxed, shoulders lowered, as though even he felt himself resting within a presence greater than the moment. There was no urgency, no weight of instruction, only the gentle awareness that the one who watched over them did not rush their journey, nor hurry their healing. Near the wall, the older man let his spine ease against the stone, muscles unwinding with a tenderness he had long forgotten his body could feel. He breathed in, slow and full, filling places within him that had been tight for years. He breathed out, soft and surrendered, releasing tension woven so deeply he had assumed it would remain forever. With each breath, he sensed something profound. He was resting, truly resting, and he was not guarding himself while he did. He felt watched, not by fear, not by expectation, but by love. The refiner's gaze was not harsh, nor impatient, nor demanding. It was attentive, gentle, deeply protective. Not a gaze waiting for him to fail, but a gaze ensuring that the fire never burned beyond what would shape him into something more radiant. Across the room, the older woman's hands rested open upon her lap, palms upturned in quiet trust. Her posture had changed without her realizing it, shoulders lowered, jaw unclenched, breath flowing with a softness that felt almost like the rhythm of sleep. For so long she had lived with fear that the trials pressing against her life would overwhelm her, reshape her into someone she did not recognize. But now, in this moment of sacred stillness, she sensed a different truth. She was not alone within the fire. She was not unobserved. She was not forgotten. The refiner watched her with a care more intimate than her own thoughts, more constant than her own breath. And in his careful watchfulness, she found rest. A rest deeper than sleep, a rest that reached into the marrow of her soul and loosened what she had held too tightly. At the doorway, the young follower leaned his head back, eyes half closed, the cool night air brushing lightly against his skin. He had always imagined that faith meant standing tall in the fire, doing something, proving something, striving to show strength even when he had none. But tonight, as his body melted into quiet comfort, he realized that the purest faith sometimes looked like stillness. Like resting. Like trusting that the one who held the flame also held him. He could feel it now, a calm presence surrounding his thoughts, a safety that did not depend on understanding, but on surrender. Every fear that had rushed through him in past nights now felt far away, softened, made smaller in the light of the one who watched over him with unwavering care. Outside, the valley offered its own silent witness to divine attentiveness. Along the lower hills, the faintest shimmer of dew had begun to form, as though the night itself was gathering small blessings to lay gently upon the earth. The stream continued its murmured journey through the darkness, steady, patient, unhindered. Even the trees rested, branches falling still beneath the subtle embrace of night air. Nature understood what the hearts in the room were only beginning to learn. That rest is not a reward for strength, but a posture made possible by trust. The messenger lifted the parchment once more, his voice quiet, slow, carried by the same peace rising through the room. The refiner watches, not to condemn, but to protect, to shape, to hold, to bring forth beauty in the exact measure of love. The words settled over them like warm linen, gentle, soothing, wrapping each soul in the assurance that nothing in their lives was unobserved. Not a sigh, not a tear, not a tremble. Not one moment of fear or doubt went unseen by the one who watched with infinite tenderness. The older man's breath deepened again, his entire body finally releasing the last strands of resistance. He felt safe. Truly, deeply safe. The older woman's eyes glistened softly, but the tears that rose were not from sorrow. They were from the quiet realization that she could stop holding everything together. She could rest. Because she was not the one keeping the fire in balance. The young follower felt something loosen in his chest, a knot that had lived there so long he had forgotten it was not meant to be permanent. He felt watched, known, understood. And in that understanding, he found peace. The messenger lowered the parchment and allowed the silence to wrap fully around the room. It was a silence filled with presence. a silence in which the refiner himself seemed to draw near, not with flame, but with calm, with shelter, with gentle hands resting over weary souls. The lamplight glowed faintly, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, the horizon brightened by a thread, a whisper, a hint of dawn waiting just beyond the curve of the earth. Inside, rest settled deeply, sweetly, like a soft blanket of mercy. The fire was still there, but so was the one who tended it. And the hearts in the room, tired, aching, refined, began to rest in that truth with quiet trust. The night had entered its softest hour, that tender stretch just before dawn when darkness loosens its hold, when silence feels deeper than breath, when the world seems to lean gently toward the promise of returning light. Inside the small room, the lamplight had dwindled to a low golden ember, its glow faint yet unwavering, like a quiet soul keeping vigil through the fading night. The air felt warm with presence, warm with stillness, warm with a peace that had been slowly forming across the long unfolding of trial, release, and surrender. The messenger rested the parchment beside him now, no longer reading, simply letting the truth already spoken continue its gentle work within every heart. There was nothing more that needed to be said in this moment. Peace had entered the room, not as a sudden tide, but as a slow unfurling, a warm light flowing over the burned, exhausted places within each soul. Near the wall, the older man's head rested lightly against the stone behind him, his breath deep and even, his posture softened into complete ease. He felt a warmth settling through him, not physical heat, but the warmth of peace, deep and quiet, filling the hollowed spaces carved by grief and trial. For so long he had felt scorched by suffering, as though the flames had left him barren and brittle. But now, to his quiet amazement, he sensed life stirring in those very places, like small shoots rising from soil once blackened by fire. The ground of his heart was no longer desolate. It was warm. It was fertile. It was held beneath a gentle light that soothed what the fire had refined. Across the room, the older woman rested her hands over her chest, her palms warm against her garment. She felt peace flowing through her like warm oil, moving softly through cracks she thought too deep to mend. Her sorrow had once felt like a desert within her, wide and burning and empty. But tonight, peace covered that desert like an early sunbeam touching cool sand, softening the edges, warming the cold places, reminding her that nothing within her story was beyond redemption. The places she thought ruined were becoming places of gentle breath again. She felt no need to resist this peace, no instinct to guard herself from it. She simply received it, the way dry earth receives morning light. Near the doorway, the young follower let his eyes close fully now, not in sleep, but in rest. A faint smile touched the corners of his mouth, small, subtle, like the first glimmer of dawn finding the ridge of a distant hill. For so long he had felt the heat of trial pressing against him, shaping him, at times frightening him. But now, as peace settled into his bones, he sensed that the fire had not consumed him, it had transformed him. What he thought was ruin had become renewal. What he feared would break him had made space for something new, something gentle, something strong enough to hold light. Outside, the valley mirrored the stillness within. The darkness had softened, its edges brushed with the faintest tint of blue, like ink diluted with dawn. The olive trees stood motionless, their branches draped in dew that gleamed faintly beneath the soundless sky. The stream flowed with a softened murmur, as if whispering a lullaby to the earth still half asleep. Even the ashes scattered from earlier fires seemed touched by a quiet glow, small flecks catching what little starlight remained. The valley understood the rhythm unfolding in the room. That after fire comes warmth. After refining comes rest. After surrender comes peace. The messenger opened his eyes slowly, watching the hearts before him settle into a calm deeper than any he had witnessed when the night first began. He could see peace resting upon them like a mantle, soft and luminous, woven not from ease but from trust. This peace had weight, not heaviness, but substance, a presence that filled the room with gentle certainty. It did not erase their trials. It embraced them. It flowed over what had burned and made it warm again. The older man exhaled softly, a breath that felt like gratitude in its purest form. He did not need to speak it. The peace moving through him spoke for him. The older woman felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it was not a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of relief. The deep, sacred relief of realizing that the fire had not taken her life, it had returned her heart. The young follower placed a hand on his chest again, this time not to steady fear, but to acknowledge the peace rising there. He was still himself, yet not the same. Peace had changed him. Outside, the sky shifted again, the faintest silver thread stretching across the horizon, hinting that morning would soon arrive. Inside, peace filled the room like warm light flowing slowly across burnt ground, healing, restoring, preparing. The lamplight quivered softly, then steadied, offering its last quiet glow. It too seemed to know that its work was nearly done, that dawn's light would soon take its place. The hearts within the room rested deeply now. Not because the world outside had changed, but because something within them had. Peace had found them in the fire. Peace now covered them like a soft mantle of morning. The night hovered in its final quiet moments, a dark velvet veil thinning gently as the faint hum of dawn gathered beyond the horizon. Inside the small room, the lamplight faded into its last soft glow, not extinguished, but resting, as though it, too, had found peace after a long night of keeping watch. The air was warm with stillness, a stillness that had shape now, fullness, presence, like a gentle hand cupped around every heart, holding them in a sanctuary woven of silence and grace. Those gathered in the room felt their spirits settling into a calm that reached deeper than exhaustion, deeper than breath, a calm that had been shaped slowly through confession, reflection, surrender, and rest. It was the calm that follows refining, the quiet that comes after fire has done its work. Not the calm of emptiness, but the calm of renewal. The older man opened his eyes slowly, the faint glow of the dying lamp softening the worn lines of his face. His heart felt different now, not lighter exactly, but softer, like soil loosened after rain, ready to nourish something new. He realized with gentle awe that he was no longer bracing himself against suffering, no longer waiting for the next burden to fall. Instead, something inside him simply rested, trusting that the one who had been faithful through the fire would be faithful beyond it. His faith felt steadier now, not because the trials had ended, but because he no longer bore them alone. Across the room, the older woman's gaze lifted toward the doorway, where the faintest silver hue had started to bloom beyond the dark horizon. She placed a hand over her heart, feeling its softened cadence. This heart had been through seasons of breaking, seasons of waiting, seasons of fire. Yet here she was, still beating, still believing, still held. Her faith, once fragile and trembling, had grown quiet and deep, like roots stretching further into softened ground. She sensed that she would carry this new stillness with her, into her home, into her days, into places where sorrow once found too easy a foothold. Her heart had become soft again, not exposed to harm, but open to grace. Near the doorway, the young follower gazed at the sky where night thinned into pale blue promise. He felt the shape of his faith shifting inside him, turning from something he tried to hold together by force, into something held by hands greater than his own. His doubts had not disappeared, but they no longer felt like storms. They felt like clouds passing across a sky that still held its steady light. He knew now that his faith did not need to roar to be real. It only needed to endure, gently, quietly, like a flame that keeps its glow even when winds rise. He pressed a hand to his chest again, not in fear this time, but in gratitude. The fire had softened him, not destroyed him. It had steadied his faith, not shattered it. The messenger looked around the room, taking in the softened expressions, the peaceful postures, the gentle glow resting upon each heart. He could feel the shift, the transformation, the quiet miracle unfolding within them. Their faith had not become stronger through effort. It had become steadier through surrender, through refinement, through the gentle, attentive work of the one who never left them in their suffering. Outside, the valley stirred with the earliest hint of dawn. The grasses shimmered with dew, each droplet catching the faintest breath of light, turning darkness into tiny glimmers of silver. The stream moved in rhythmic murmur, carrying reflections of a sky not yet bright but no longer dark. Olive trees stood tall, their leaves trembling softly as a new breeze swept through the valley, a breeze cool, tender, and full of promise. The land itself seemed to speak, in silence, in shimmer, in softened shadow. It spoke of renewal. It spoke of beginnings. It spoke of the quiet strength born from seasons of surrender. Back inside the room, the older man bowed his head, not in heaviness, but in reverence. The older woman clasped her hands gently, feeling a warmth between her palms that felt almost like blessing. The young follower inhaled the cool morning air drifting in through the doorway, letting it settle into him like peace made tangible. They had walked through fire. They had sat in long night. They had wept, surrendered, listened, rested. And here, in the faint glow before dawn, they discovered themselves made new. Not perfect, not unscarred, but soft, steady, shaped by love. A heart made soft can feel God again. A faith made steady can trust Him again. And in this quiet transformation, glory was already beginning to rise. Outside, a single bird called into the tender stillness, a small, hopeful sound marking the first breath of morning. Inside, Each soul carried a soft radiance, a warm, steady peace, a quiet readiness for the dawn that was now approaching. The night had nearly dissolved now, its darkness thinning into a soft wash of silver and pale rose along the distant horizon. Dawn had not yet broken, but its breath was on the valley, a quiet warmth rising from the earth as though creation itself exhaled after a long night of watching and waiting. Inside the small room, the lamplight glowed in its final ember, a tiny pulse of gold resting in a cradle of glass and oil, faithful to the end. It had carried them through the long night, just as the refiner's presence had carried their hearts. The messenger placed the parchment gently beside him, no longer reading, for every word that needed to be spoken had already found its home within the hearts gathered. What remained now was rest. Deep rest. Sacred rest. The older man leaned back against the wall, his breath slow, his eyes heavy with the sweetness of release. His heart felt full, not with answers, but with peace. He had walked through the fire, he had endured the smoke, he had carried sorrow like stones in his chest. But now, in the tender hush before dawn, he felt the truth settle over him like a soft blanket. His faith, tested, refined, shaped by flames he once feared, was precious. Not because it was strong, but because it had survived. Because it had been held. Because it had been loved through every trembling moment. Across the room, the older woman rested her cheek lightly against her shoulder, her eyes half closed, her breath deep and slow. She had grieved, she had questioned, she had waited for seasons where silence felt endless. But now, her soul felt warm, not with certainty, but with trust. The trust that grew not from understanding, but from being seen. From being held. From knowing that none of her pain, none of it, had been wasted. Her faith shimmered within her like soft gold beneath morning light, not loud, not radiant, but deeply precious. A treasure refined through tears that had watered seeds of hope she did not know she had. Near the doorway, the young follower let his head tilt gently against the wooden frame, the cool breath of morning brushing across his brow. He felt quiet inside, quiet in a way he had never known. His doubts had not disappeared, nor his questions, but they no longer carried fear. They had become openings, small windows through which the light of dawn could enter. His faith, once fragile, now felt steady, not because of his strength, but because of the one who had walked with him through all that he did not understand. He felt held in a way that eased every corner of him, as though gentle hands rested over his heart, guarding its quiet transformation. Outside, the valley transformed slowly. The first pale ray of dawn brushed the crest of the farthest hill, a soft, silken stroke of gold across the deep blue. Dew shimmered like countless tiny mirrors, reflecting the faint light with gentle brilliance. The stream glowed with early silver, its surface smoothing into calm as morning approached. Olive trees trembled lightly beneath a breeze cool enough to soothe, warm enough to promise. It was as though creation itself whispered the same truth spoken in the room. There is glory beyond this moment. There is radiance rising from what was refined. There is beauty born from what was broken. Inside, silence wrapped around the gathered hearts in a way that felt like a final blessing. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of fullness. A silence filled with presence, with warmth, with the unmistakable nearness of the one who had walked with them through the fire and brought them into peace. The messenger lowered his head in quiet gratitude. This night had not removed their trials, but it had reframed them. This night had not erased their pain, but it had shown the purpose within it. This night had not given them certainty, but it had given them rest. The older man's breathing grew slower, softer, his hands resting loosely by his sides. The older woman's head dipped gently as her eyes closed fully now, her posture curled into peaceful surrender. The young follower's shoulders fell into a calm, steady rhythm as his body relaxed completely into the embrace of dawn's first breath. They rested. Not because they had reached the end of their journey, but because they had discovered they were not walking it alone. Not because the fire was gone, but because the one who held it watched over them with love that did not waver. Not because their faith was strong, but because their faith, tested, trembling, refined, was precious. More precious than gold. Dawn touched the threshold of the doorway at last, a soft spill of gold flowing inward, mingling with the last ember of the lamp. Light met light. Warmth met warmth. Morning met hearts ready to receive it. The room, once heavy with sorrow, now held peace so deep it moved like a river. A peace that whispered gently to weary souls. Rest now. Rest in his care. Rest in the one who watched you through the fire. Rest in the dawn he brings. And as the morning light touched each face, peaceful and serene, their hearts settled into stillness as soft as sleep, wrapped in a love eternal and unwavering.